Are you ready for the ECCE? This is a brief guide how to use the ECCE Screening Test. Let's start with having a look at what the ECCE Screening Test is. The ECCE Screening Test comprises the listening and GVR sections of the ECCE. It is designed to be a useful tool for teachers, intended to be administered at the beginning or middle of the academic year. It gives an indication of the current level of students in order to predict how well they may perform on the ECCE. It shows which parts of the ECCE test students may have a better performance in, and it gives a visual indication of whether a student's correct answers form a consistent pattern by comparing the difficulty of the items with the ability of the student. It should be noted that each item was rated by 22 experienced judges according to the level of difficulty. Judges' decisions were put into three categories of difficulty: easier, medium difficulty, more difficult. 25 of the 50 listening items, that is, 50% of the items, and 46 of the 100 GVR items, that is, 46%, were categorized as being of medium difficulty. 17 of the 50 listening items, the 34%, and 35 of the 100 GVR items, 35%, were placed in the difficult category. This table can show you the distribution of items in the sections of the test. Now let's have a look at the ECCE Screening Test grid. You are reminded that the test grid is to be found on page 5 of your ECCE Screening Test booklet. Each part of the grid represents a section of ECCE, for example, Listening Part 1, Grammar. Each section has 3 columns: easier, medium, harder. Numbers on the grid represent item numbers on the test. Item numbers are placed in columns which show how difficult the item is. For example, item 86 in the vocabulary section below is of medium difficulty, item 87 is harder, while items 88 and 89 are easier. This is how to use the ECCE Screening Test grid in the classroom to indicate the current level of students' ability in the ECCE. It is suggested that you print or photocopy the ECCE Screening Test grid for the students. Then, after students finish the test, please remember under Test Conditions, each item on the grid which was answered correctly should be circled. In this way, you will have a visual of the total number of correct answers on the test. The following slides are examples of patterns formed after the correct answers of the students are recorded on the grid. These examples show you how to interpret the outcome of the students' results in the test. In this first example, in the vocabulary section, the student has answered correctly 6 out of 7 easier items, 2 out of 16 medium items, 1 out of 12 more difficult items. The level of the student for vocabulary is below the expected level. This is because, first, only 2 medium difficulty items were answered correctly, and second, the one correctly answered difficult item may be due to guessing. The second example shows that in the vocabulary section, the student has answered correctly 6 out of 7 easier items, 11 out of 16 medium items, and 3 out of 12 more difficult items. The level of the student for vocabulary is at the expected level. Now, this is because, first, almost all easier items were answered correctly. The one mistake may be due to carelessness. Second, a large number of the medium-level items were answered correctly. And third, the 3 more difficult items answered correctly shows that the student is beginning to gain competence above the level. In this third example, in the vocabulary section, the student has answered correctly 7 out of 7 easier items, 14 out of 16 medium items, 9 out of 12 more difficult items. In this example, the level of the student for vocabulary is above the expected level. This is because, first, all easier items were answered correctly. Second, only 2 medium difficulty items were answered incorrectly. And third, almost all more difficult items were answered correctly. Example 4 shows that in the vocabulary section, the student has answered almost half of the items correctly. But we must be careful here because it does not depend only on the number of correct answers. These items are 3 out of 7 easier items, 8 out of 16 medium items, 6 out of 12 more difficult items. Now, the pattern of correct answers for this section is random and may be due to guessing. First, because more medium and difficult items were answered correctly than easier items. Second, almost as many difficult items were answered correctly as medium ones, even though there are more medium items in the section. And third, the pattern of correct answers towards the end may indicate copying. Concluding, we should have a look at how we could predict success at the ECCE based on the results of the screening test. Students can be expected to be in a favorable position to improve their English in order to gain a pass at the ECCE if they have more than 25 correct answers in the screening test listening section, 50 correct answers in the screening test GVR section. It is reminded that teachers can use the patterns of correct answers to identify which sections of the ECCE the students need to focus more on. And finally, teachers and students should note that success on the screening test can only indicate success at the ECCE provided students continue to study and improve their English.